My world had become a museum of silence. Every room in the sprawling mansion was a tribute to a life that was no longer there, each polished surface reflecting a ghost. After Evelyn passed, the silence was my only companion, a heavy blanket I pulled over my head. It was a suffocating comfort, a constant reminder of my loss. Until Leo, my son, our son. Now the silence was shattered, replaced by a sound that felt infinitely worse. The relentless, piercing cry of a newborn who could not be soothed. For 3 hours that sound had been a physical assault, echoing off the marble floors and climbing the mahogany staircase of a house too large and too empty for the three of us. It was the sound of a life in distress, and I, Arthur Vance, CEO of a tech empire, builder of digital worlds, was utterly, pathetically helpless. I was on a video conference with Tokyo, trying to close a 9-figure deal, but the wailing from upstairs was a siren, bleeding through the soundproofed walls of my study. My jaw was a knot of steel. I could see the strained expressions on the faces of my Japanese counterparts. They were too polite to comment, but the message was clear: get your house in order. My house. A mausoleum run by a skeleton crew. And at the heart of the storm was Chloe, the nanny I'd hired from the city's most exclusive agency. Her resume was impeccable. Her references glowed. She was supposed to be the solution, the calm professional who would bring order to my chaotic new reality. Yet, for all her credentials, Leo's cries only seemed to intensify under her care. An hour into my meeting, she had knocked softly on my study door. "Mr. Vance," she'd said, her expression a perfect mask of concern. "Leo's formula isn't agreeing with him. The pharmacy has a special European brand they recommended. I must go and get it. It's the only thing that might work." I'd waved her off, desperate for any solution. "Fine, just handle it, Chloe. That's what I pay you for." Now, 2 hours later, she was still gone, and Leo's cries had changed. The anger had faded into a desperate, choked whimper that was far more terrifying. It was the sound of a motor running out of fuel. My focus on the deal shattered. I ended the call with a curt apology and strode out of my office, the sound of my own heart hammering in my ears. I took the stairs 2 at a time, the whimpering from Leo's room growing weaker with every step. And that's when I saw her. Not Chloe. It was Elara, the quiet one. The maid who drifted through the house like a phantom, her presence so unobtrusive I barely registered her name. I knew she was young, maybe 24, with hands that were already rough from work and eyes that held a permanent shadow of some distant sorrow. She was just there, part of the background. But now, she was the center of my universe. The door to the nursery was ajar. I pushed it open and froze. The scene before me defied all logic, all propriety. Elara was sitting in the rocking chair by the window, the one Evelyn had picked out. Her blouse was unbuttoned, and cradled against her breast, feeding with a desperate, frantic rhythm, was my son, Leo, silent, at peace. My mind short-circuited. A tidal wave of white-hot rage crashed over me. Violation. Intrusion. How dare she? This was an intimacy reserved for a mother, for Evelyn. This quiet, nameless girl had crossed an unforgivable line. My fists clenched, my entire body rigid. I was about to roar, to tear her from that chair, to throw her out into the cold night. But something stopped me. The silence. It wasn't the dead, empty silence of the house. It was a living, breathing tranquility. I watched the gentle rise and fall of Leo's back, the way his tiny hand was curled against her skin. On his face was an expression of pure, unadulterated bliss. a look I hadn't seen since the first few days of his life, when Evelyn was still with us. The rage was still there, a venomous serpent coiling in my gut, but it was now tangled with a confusion so profound it left me breathless. She was saving him. In the most primal, intimate way imaginable, this stranger was giving my son the one thing he desperately needed, the one thing I, with all my millions, could not provide. I backed away from the door, my heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions, and retreated into the shadows of the hallway to wait. When Chloe finally returned an hour later, shopping bags from luxury boutiques rustling in her arms, I met her at the door. The single, small bag from the pharmacy was an afterthought. Her cheeks were flushed, not from rushing, but from the pleasant chill of an afternoon spent at the mall. "Traffic was a nightmare," she sighed, feigning exhaustion with an almost theatrical flair. "But I got the special formula." I stared at her, my voice dangerously low, the sound of ice cracking. "You were gone for 3 hours, Chloe." Her eyes darted away for a fraction of a second, the only crack in her composed facade. "The queues, they were immense. Everyone is worried about this new infant flu." It was a clumsy, pathetic lie, and we both knew it. But before I could press her, she glanced towards the stairs, a sly, manipulative look entering her eyes. "Is the baby all right? I heard about the other girl, Elara. You must be careful, Mr. Vance. A woman who has lost her own child, sometimes they become attached, obsessed even. It's not healthy. People will talk." Her words were poison, but they found fertile ground in my own raging confusion and simmering outrage. "She's unstable. It's a violation. She's projecting her loss onto my son." It was a clean, simple explanation that absolved me of the unsettling gratitude I felt. I summoned Elara to my study. She stood before my imposing mahogany desk, her gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. She looked small, fragile, and utterly broken. Leo was asleep in his crib upstairs, full and peaceful for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "I don't know what you think you were doing," I began, my voice as cold and hard as I could make it. "I needed to be the master of my house, the protector of my son. I couldn't afford sentiment." "She's unstable. It's a violation. She's projecting her loss onto my son." It was a clean, simple explanation that absolved me of the unsettling gratitude I felt. I summoned Elara to my study. She stood before my imposing mahogany desk, her gaze fixed on the intricate patterns of the Persian rug, her hands clasped tightly behind her back. She looked small, fragile, and utterly broken. Leo was asleep in his crib upstairs, full and peaceful for the first time in what felt like an eternity. "I don't know what you think you were doing," I began, my voice as cold and hard as I could make it. "I needed to be the master of my house, the protector of my son. I couldn't afford sentiment. What you did was a gross overstep of your duties, a violation of trust, and a profound lack of judgment." She flinched, a small, barely perceptible tremor running through her. "He was in pain, sir. The bottle, it had spoiled. He hadn't eaten for hours. I didn't know what else to do. He was just so weak." "Enough," I cut her off, the rawness of her explanation making me feel even more ashamed. I couldn't bear to hear the simple, devastating truth in her voice because it highlighted my own failure. "Your services are no longer required. Pack your things. You are to leave immediately." "Please," she whispered, and for the first time she lifted her head and looked me directly in the eye. The depth of the pain I saw there, a maelstrom of grief, loss, and now fresh heartbreak almost buckled my knees. Just let me say goodbye to him, just for a moment. No, I said, the word coming out harsher than I intended. I turned away to look out the window at the now pouring rain, unable to face the accusation in her gaze. You are fired. Leave now. I heard her quiet footsteps retreat, followed by the soft click of the door closing. I stood there for a long time, watching the rain streak down the glass, trying to convince myself I had done the right thing, that I had protected my son from a dangerous emotional entanglement. But the image of Leo, safe and serene in her arms, was burned into my mind, a stark contrast to the sterile emptiness that now filled the nursery upstairs. I had restored order, but at what cost? I had chosen the word of a liar over the evidence of my own eyes. And as the storm raged outside, a far terrible one was just beginning within the walls of my perfect, silent house.
The days that followed were a descent into a specific kind of hell reserved for helpless fathers. Leo's condition didn't just worsen, it plummeted. He refused the bottle from Chloe, whose feigned concern now grated on my nerves like sandpaper. He refused it from the 2 subsequent highly recommended nannies I hired and fired in a 48-hour panic. He wailed until his voice was a hoarse rasp, his small body growing thinner, his skin taking on a pale, almost translucent quality. The pediatrician was baffled. Physically, he's fine. There's no infection, no allergy we can detect. Specialists were called in. They ran tests, offered theories about colic and rare digestive disorders, but nothing worked. My son was starving himself, not from a physical ailment, but from a grief I couldn't comprehend, and a hunger I couldn't satisfy. It's psychological trauma, a renowned child expert finally told me, her face grim after a long observation. She has lost a significant emotional bond, a primary source of comfort. At this age, that can be as fatal as any disease. Think, Mr. Vance, is there anyone she was particularly close to? Anyone who left recently? The question hung in the air, a guillotine poised over my head. Elara. That evening, I was pacing in the back garden, the manicured lawns and sculpted hedges feeling like a prison. I needed to escape the sound of Leo's weak cries, which had become the soundtrack to my failure. That's when I heard Chloe's voice from the open window of the staff quarters, low and conspiratorial. I crept closer, hiding behind a large Grecian urn. She was on the phone, her voice dripping with a casual cruelty that made my blood run cold. One couldn't miss the greed in her voice, as if she was telling a huge secret as the offer of a casual kindness. Yeah, the old man fell for it completely. He actually fired the sob story girl. Now the kid won't stop crying, which is a total pain, but it's not my problem. By the way, I managed to get another box of his expensive medication. This one's worth over $300. We'll make a huge profit. The world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from my face, replaced by an icy, paralyzing dread. It wasn't just neglect. It was a calculated, monstrous betrayal. The spoiled milk, the lies about the pharmacy, stealing medicine from my dying son, and I had been her willing accomplice. I had punished the one person who had tried to save him, and protected the one who was methodically, callously destroying him. The guilt was a physical force, a fist clenching around my lungs, leaving me gasping for air. I had cast an angel out into the streets and left my son in the care of a demon. I stormed into the staff quarters. The look of pure terror on Chloe's face when she saw me was my only satisfaction. I didn't need a confession. I had heard everything. I fired her on the spot, my voice a low roar of fury, and threw her out of my house, her belongings following her onto the rain-slicked driveway. But that was a hollow victory. It changed nothing. Elara was gone, and my son was fading. My search began that night, a millionaire hunting through the city's underbelly, a world I had only ever viewed from the tinted windows of my limousine. I started at her old boarding house, a grim, run-down building smelling of damp and despair. "Left 3 weeks ago," the manager grunted, not even looking up from his newspaper. Employment centers, churches, police stations. No one had seen her. With each rejection, the vice around my chest tightened. I showed her picture to faces hardened by the streets, to eyes that were either empty or predatory. They saw my expensive coat, my desperate eyes, and saw either a threat or an opportunity. "You a cop?" one man snarled, his breath smelling of cheap whiskey. "What's a man like you want with a girl like that?" He spat on the ground near my polished shoes. For 4 sleepless days and nights, I drove through the slums and parks, my heart aching with a pain far greater than the grief for my wife. This was a pain born of my own arrogance and monumental error. On the 5th night, when all hope had withered to a dry, brittle thing, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. "You the one looking for Elara?" a gravelly old voice asked. "Yes," I nearly shouted, my voice raw with exhaustion and desperation. "Do you know where she is?" "My name is Samuel," the voice said, slow and measured. "I've been on these streets a long time. She's a good kid. Hasn't had an easy time of it. Why are you looking for her?" My throat tightened. "Because my son is dying," I confessed, the words tearing from me raw and unfiltered. "And she's the only one who can save him. I made a terrible, unforgivable mistake, and I have to fix it." There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of wind. "She's under the Avenida Caracas Bridge," Samuel finally said. "But hear me. If you hurt her again, we won't forgive you." I drove like a man possessed, the sleek engine of my Bentley a stark contrast to the gritty, forgotten streets I sped through. The address Samuel had given me led to the dark, damp underbelly of an overpass. The air was thick with the smell of wet concrete and misery. Beneath the bridge, in the deep shadows punctuated by the distant glow of city lights, I found her. She was huddled in a corner against a cold stone pillar, wrapped in a tattered, thin blanket. Her body was racked with a hacking cough that sounded painful and deep. She was thinner, almost skeletal, her face gaunt, her eyes hollowed out pits of despair. She looked like a ghost, a fragile echo of the quiet girl who had once polished my silver. "Elara," I breathed, my voice breaking. The name felt like a prayer and a curse on my lips. She flinched at the sound of my voice, recoiling like a wounded animal. Her eyes, when they met mine, were wide with fear. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was a hoarse, ragged whisper. I dropped to my knees in the dirt before her, the cold and damp seeping through my expensive trousers. The rain dripped from the concrete above, mingling with the tears I no longer tried to hide. "Please," I begged, the word tearing from me, stripped of all pride. "Listen to me. Ethan, my son, he's in the hospital. He's dying, Elara. The doctors say it's a broken heart. He won't eat. He needs you. He remembers you." She let out a bitter, hollow laugh that was more painful than a scream. "Save him? I already did, and I was thrown into the streets for it, shamed, humiliated. How can I ever trust you again?" You can't," I admitted, the shame so heavy it felt like a physical weight. "I don't deserve your trust, but please, don't punish him for my mistake. I was wrong, terribly wrong. I'll do anything. I'll give you anything. Please, come back. For him." Tears welled in her own eyes, spilling down her dirt-streaked cheeks. She looked at me, then her gaze drifted off, to a place I couldn't see, a memory of her own loss. For a long, agonizing moment, I was sure she would refuse. But then, she gave a faint, almost imperceptible nod. "Fine," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant traffic. "Only for Ethan. After he's well, I'm gone." At the hospital, the change was nothing short of a miracle.
The moment Elara, now cleaned and dressed in fresh clothes from the hospital's charity closet, entered the room and whispered his name, Ethan's eyelids fluttered. He gave a weak, tired smile. The doctors and nurses watched, stunned, as she sat down and took him into her arms. Within seconds, he was feeding at her breast, his small body finally relaxing, his desperate cries silenced. It was a miracle born of a mother's selfless love, even if it wasn't for the child she had borne.
1 month later, Ethan was discharged, healthy and vibrant, a completely different child. His cheeks were rosy, his eyes sparkled with life, and he smiled every time Elara carried him. The same neighbors who had whispered in scorn now whispered in awe as we walked out of the hospital together, a strange, fractured little family. I no longer cared what they thought. The only things that mattered were Ethan and the woman who had saved his life. Isabella did not leave. The walls she had built around her heart were slowly, painstakingly dismantled by the unconditional love of a child who saw her simply as Mama. I spent every moment I could at home, stepping back from the company, realizing for the first time what was truly important. I was no longer just a CEO, I was a father, trying to earn forgiveness. We shared responsibilities. I would handle the late-night changes, she would soothe his morning fussiness. In the quiet evenings, as Ethan slept soundly between us on the sofa, we began to talk. We shared our stories, our grief, and hesitantly our hopes. One weekend evening, I took them both to the park where I had first found her in the rain. Instead of a cold bench and a tattered newspaper, there was a warm picnic blanket, a basket of pastries, and the sound of Ethan's delighted laughter as he toddled in the grass. I looked at Elara, her face illuminated by the setting sun, and my heart felt a warmth I thought had died with Evelyn. From my pocket, I pulled a small velvet box. "Elara," I said, my voice steady yet trembling with emotion, "I made the worst mistake of my life when I let you go. I can't lose you again. You have become the mother Ethan needs and the woman I have fallen in love with. If you'll give me this chance, I promise I will spend the rest of my life proving I deserve you." Tears streamed down her face, but this time they were not tears of pain. They were tears of disbelief, of hope reborn. She looked from me to Ethan, who had now toddled over and was hugging her leg, babbling happily. "I once lost everything," she whispered, her trembling hand reaching out to touch mine. "But through him and through you, I found the meaning of family again. Yes, Arthur, yes." I slipped the simple, elegant ring onto her finger, my own tears blurring my vision. Ethan wrapped his tiny arms around both of our legs, babbling in his innocent voice, as if sealing the promise. We were no longer 3 broken souls. We were a family, forged not in blood, but in something far stronger, a love born from sacrifice, loss, and the incredible healing power of a second chance.
Perhaps we will not see you again, so subscribe to this channel to listen to more interesting stories.